So we are over in Matthew. Looking at Jesus as our Passover. You know, as we come into the New Testament, let me make sure my phone's on. Barry, and looking at the sermon, surprised me that the whole reason Siri went, well, a little haywire and everything, and it was, and hopefully it doesn't do it here, was because I said the word series in the sermon. And so that triggered Siri to, hey, how can I help you today? You know, last week, we were continuing on our discussion about being the seed of Judah and the seed of David and Jesus being the Lamb of God. And we were talking about Abram. Well, I got some questions last week. Well, it was really just kind of one question after the class as to why I presented Abraham and Isaac that way. When I was mentioning that there could have been a struggle in a different age and all of this. And I'll tell you, if you don't already know, why I do that, not just in classes, but perhaps in sermons. For me, if the Bible is absolutely clear about something and the matter is black and white, then I'm going to present exactly what the Bible says. Right? If there is some interpretation to it, or some ambiguity to it, then I will present alternate views, only because where the Bible is kind of in a gray area or there's some interpretation, there is the possibility that someone hasn't considered another interpretation. And my goal is to try to get people, well, to open up the Word of God and to study and to kind of reach their own conclusion as best as they can, right? So if the Bible's clear, I'm going to be clear. If there's some gray area, then I'll kind of let you know what thoughts are. And we were nearing the end of class, so I didn't have time to go into all of it. But the main thing that I had mentioned that caused the question was him possibly being younger, and that there was maybe a struggle, you know, in getting him bound and what have you. So I want to, before we get into Jesus being our Passover, kind of clarify all of that, and I'll let you know where I fall, not that it has to be where you fall. So the first interpretation is that Isaac was a child, anywhere from 5 to 12 years old. Now that's the first one. Now, some suggest that it's possible because Abram, he lays the wood on Isaac's back. Now remember first, Abraham, he gets up early and he saddles a donkey, so they have a pack animal. We're over here in Genesis 22. And there's 2 men with him, right? And then it says, and he chopped the wood. Now the he could either be Abram or Isaac. Most people say it was Abraham. Okay, because otherwise it might have read as, and his son Isaac who chopped the wood, instead of his son Isaac and he chopped the wood, because then it's a little ambiguous. Now some people would say, a kid of, 12 years old couldn't really carry any wood. Well, one, that depends on, we have no idea how much wood was carried. We just know it was enough for a sack. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you just said the first one was 5 years old?
Well, 5 to 12 years old. 5 to 12.
Okay.
5 to 12. And, now a kid today, who's inside and, well, quite frankly, pampered and all they do is play video games, yeah, they might have a struggle at 12 years old of carrying a bundle of wood on their back or something like that. Again, we don't know how much wood it was. You ever been to a rodeo, though? Or maybe someone who grew up in ag. You see those 12-year-olds riding out and wrestling these large sheep to the ground and hog-tying them within 10 seconds. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Isaac at 12 years old could carry a bundle or two of firewood on his back. He's not the pampered kid, right? So that's a possibility. Another possibility, and there is a word there that's consistently used, and we might spell it out as N-A''A'-R, Na'ar, okay? And that describes a boy or a lad or something like that. The second idea is that Isaac was a teenager, somewhere between 13 and 19 years old. And the reason being is because of that word Na'ar, N-A''A'-R. Because over in Genesis 37, Joseph, who is 17 at the time, the word there is Na'ar. So it could be a young boy, it could be someone in the teenage years. Isaac's ability to carry the wood could point to him being older. And in Genesis 17, I guess I should turn back to Genesis, huh? That might help us a little bit. But in Genesis chapter 17, and verse 17, it says, Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, Will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? So Abraham was 100 when Isaac's born, and Sarah's 90. So there's the idea that he was a teenager, means that it's possible he was in his 20s, right? Even 20s to 30s. Now, where I fall, and I'll tell you why, is that he was probably anywhere from 35 to 37 years old at the time of this happening. And the reason that I say that is because most Jewish historians, and this is why I go with it, or one of the reasons why I go with it, is because, one, with Sarah being 90 when Isaac is born, she dies shortly after this incident at 127 years old. So he can't be more than 37 at this time, because this happens, before she dies. In fact, Jewish scholars believe that she died as a result of this event, that she heard about it and it caused her such great pains and heartache, and that she maybe had a heart attack and died. But again, that's open to interpretation. I say 35 to 37 only because there's no guarantee that it was this event, and that she immediately died after this happened and what have you. Also the fact that it fits with him being able to carry the wood up a mountain. It's not as though he's carrying it across a field or anything. Is anybody else hot in here? Okay. I forgot to turn these on. We got blankets over there for you cold people, but I'm sweating like a stuck pig. And the last thing we need is me preaching and it's just like drenched in sweat, That's right, baptism by fire. But he's not going across a flat field. He's going up a mountain. And so that's that's another thing. So, and also, I don't believe that there was a struggle. One, because I find it difficult to believe that a man who is 100 years old when Isaac's born, now if we put in 35 years, so he's 135, is going to overpower, a young 35-year-old guy who's in his prime. And also is that while he is not Christ, there is reference to him in the New Testament. We've got types and antitypes. I'll give you some of those. In Hebrews 11, verses 17 to 19, is that by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only son. It was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. And so there, the Hebrew writer is clearly referencing Isaac as a type, as a kind of foreshadowing of Christ. We also have the foreshadowing or type in Genesis 22 as Isaac being his only son, just as Christ, the only begotten son. The ram is the substitutionary atonement. That's Christ. So it's not. So we've got a couple of types going on. We have Isaac in one sense and the ram in another sense. That, we should be the ones that die and receive God's wrath, but instead Christ is like that ram, is that he is the substitution. There is also the fact of Isaac carrying the wood and relating to Christ carrying the cross. The location, even. In Genesis 22 and verse 2, it says, "Go to the land of Moriah on one of the mountains of which I will tell you." Well, 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1 identifies Mount Moriah as the site where Solomon built his temple. Well, Calvary and Golgotha is in the same mountain region as Jerusalem. It's a mountain region. It's not just one mountain that's there. Okay? And so the geography itself foreshadows that. So we have Isaac as the only son, Jesus the only son, Isaac carrying wood up the mountain, Christ carrying his cross, going to, Isaac going up there to be sacrificed. So there is a type there. And so that's why, and Christ went willingly. He didn't struggle. He laid down his life. He clearly said, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down willingly." And there was no argument about it. And so for that reason, me personally, and again, I present these views so that you can study for yourself and reach your own conclusion. But that's why I fall that Isaac was between 35 and 37 years old, and that there wasn't any type of struggle, and that it was his faith, and that he allowed himself to be tied and, climbed up and did it willingly. Right? That's just me, and so that's why, and I would have presented that last week, but again, we were near the end of class and didn't really have time. Any thoughts or comments, though? Yes, sir.
I know in Josephus, he says he was 25.
Yeah. Josephus,
But he wasn't there.
Josephus, you might remember, he was a Jewish historian. He wrote the Antiquities of the Jews and some other things. He was a slave of a Roman, but then he was set free, and he was actually there when Jerusalem fell in AD 70. So he's kind of a reliable source as well. But again, the scriptures don't exactly say his age. So. But thank you for pointing that out. Any other thoughts or comments? Okie dokie then.
So when we're teaching our little ones, we have to make the man grow up.
Well, it's...
We don't mention age, we just say. And then they're going to assume whatever they want. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, and, it's when you're teaching those that are younger, it can be especially difficult because it's you don't want to confuse them, and how much information is too much.
Right.
And if you present, all 4 different ages and all of this, then they're just going to think you're confused and don't know what you're talking about. They're going to come out of class and mom's going to say, "Hey, what'd you learn in class?" "I have no idea." And neither does she. Yes, sir.
When we're teaching children, I think it's okay to say, we may not know everything, because they're going to figure out we don't know everything at some point anyway.
Yeah, and just pointing that out, the Bible doesn't say how old he was. And maybe just kind of leaving it at that,
Yeah.
Just like, when it comes to David and Goliath, most scholars believe he was, his late 30s, maybe even early 40s. And that the apostles, a lot of people believe that the apostles, they were late teens, early 20s. So just kind of those things.
But he was raised with such strong faith by his parents
Yeah,
that he knew whatever happened, God was in charge. So in my mind, I can't see him struggling with his dad simply because of the faith grounding that he had.
yeah. No, absolutely.
And the obedience that he had for his father,
Yeah.
of respect. So you're not gonna punch him in the face and say, no way, Dad.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I don't think so.
It sounded like he was.
Not today, Satan.
At 37, he couldn't do
My
it.
brothers would have said, no way.
So then we're coming to Jesus. Oh, well, any other thoughts or comments? Okay.
I was just thinking as a child, when you're teaching a child,
Yeah.
they take on their persona. They see it
Yeah.
from their point of view.
Yeah.
So when you say a child, does the Bible say child?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
boy or yeah, whatever the.
They're taking
Yeah.
on their age.
Yeah.
They would take on their age.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So,
A young lad. All depends on the translation, really.
yeah.
Yeah.
You just don't mention age and hope it doesn't come into their mind.
Well, I mean, if they ask, well, how old was he? Well, the Bible doesn't exactly tell us how old he was. That's, a truthful answer and a biblical answer.
Because the little one wouldn't have the faith.
But it would be good for you to have reached a conclusion yourself, because then they might say, well, how old do you think he was? So even if you're not saying it, you have to kind of reason with yourself to be able to, well, why do you think this? But that goes for other things as well. Why do you not believe in using non-vocal mechanical instruments in service? Why do you believe in taking the Lord's Supper every week? Why do you believe, that? So it's kind of one of those things, and it goes into a whole lot of areas, not just worship when we look at it, just like even though the Bible says a great fish and doesn't specifically say a whale, I think it was a whale that got Jonah, and that's only because of recent news reports of whales eating people and then spitting them up a few minutes later. That's happened 2 or 3 times this last year. Whales are getting hungry. Stay out of the water, kids.
But at least they're spitting on it.
So we come to Jesus is our Passover. So when night fell on Egypt there in Exodus chapter 12, right, it doesn't matter, and it didn't matter then, as to whether there was a king sitting on his throne, or whether you were a peasant down in the village, whether you lived in a mansion, or whether you were sleeping on the dirt on the hills. It did not matter. All that mattered was, is the blood of the lamb on the doorpost of that house? Right? So maybe if you were in a field or something like that, you'd get in someone's house. So it didn't matter then. But, eternity, when God says, this is when it's going to end, and just like Christ said, no man knows the hour, right? The only concern that we are going to have is, am I covered by the blood of Christ? Doesn't matter at all. Doesn't matter how much money you earn. I'll tell you, I was talking to Austin yesterday, and we were talking about work and things like that, and he mentioned that money was the most important thing. And I told him, I said, no, it's not the most important thing. And he said, well, are you going to pay my bills? I said, no. Are you going to buy me a car? No. So money is important. And I told him, I said, money's important. I didn't say it wasn't, but it's not the most important thing. And he said, well, what is the most important thing? And I said, well, do you want me to be honest with you, or do you want me to lie to you? And he said, both. You know, one of those kind of, how do I do this? You know? And I told him, I said, okay, most important thing, relationship with Christ. That's the most important. Because no matter how much money you earn, you can't take it with you. No matter how big of a house you have, no matter how much stuff you have, it's all going to be left behind. I can't tell you just on my way home yesterday as to how many estate sales I passed. And we all know an estate sale is someone who's passed away and the relatives are just trying to get rid of their things because no one wants them. The lie that I told them, money's the most important thing. And so it's like, yeah, money's important, you need it, but what would a man profit to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Right? At the end, when we draw our last breath, it's only going to matter, do I know Christ? And even more so, does Christ know me? Because there are plenty of people who say, I know Christ. Remember, he said, many are going to come to me. I cast out demons in your name. I did this in your name. I did that in my name. And what's he going to say? Depart from me. I never knew you. You might know about me. You might read this book. You might know all the facts and you can have it all memorized. But does Christ know you? And I'm going to get off my soapbox on that because, well, quite frankly, that's what we're talking about this morning and with the 10 virgins. Jesus Christ is our Passover. 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are, in fact, unleavened. For Christ, our Passover, also has been sacrificed. So Christ is our Passover lamb. It is his blood that covers us. Without the shedding of blood, there is no way. There is no redemption, there's no salvation, there's no sacrifice for sins without the shedding of blood. Christ had to die. Thoughts or comments?
Do you think that's why, in the very beginning, Leviticus and all that, when they had to sacrifice, they had to have the blood? That was just his plan in the very beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
To show blood, you have to have blood.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look in Leviticus 1 especially, I can't remember if I did a sermon on this, maybe in the first year or not, to be honest with you, is there's really kind of 5 elements that you see in the sacrifice, especially in Leviticus chapter 1. One is it being a voluntary sacrifice. Another is the association of putting a hand on the sacrifice. I can't remember the third one offhand. The fourth element is all of the details. This part's for this is parts for this part's for this, to let us know God does care about the details. He's not a broad strokes kind of God. He cares about the details. And then the fifth is actually the result of the previous 4, which is that it is a sweet-smelling savor to God when all of those things are done. And so we kind of look at that. I'll have to look and try to remember what the third is.
Wasn't it the placement of where the sacrifice was slaughtered?
Absolutely.
Because different sacrifices were at different, the east or the front or the.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And another, when I mentioned types with Isaac and Christ before, another thing too is, the type of sacrifice that was made, not only depending on what the sacrifice was for, but what the people could bring was also determined based on economic status. If you could bring a lamb without blemish, then do that. But if perhaps you're poor, then you could bring 2 pigeons or 2 turtle doves or what have you, right? A type being that the ultimate sacrifice of Christ covers not only those who are up here, but all the way down to those that are down here.
Thank goodness.
Absolutely, because I'm definitely one of those down there,
2 mice,
Yeah, the widow and her 2 mites, absolutely. But yeah. In Leviticus, I know that for many it can be just a drudge to get through because of all of the details. But when you read that in tandem with the New Testament, especially the sacrifice of Christ and what have you, it really does put it alive. And even still, just looking at all of the sacrifices that they had to make, consider that when we come to the sacrifice of Christ and we're at Passover, now where are they sacrificing all of those animals? Well, at the temple, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it wasn't just one animal for the people. I mean, there were hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of animals sacrificed. And so that leads us to even, this atmosphere of death that was surrounding the Christ's, what's referred to in Catholicism as his Passion Week, right? Is that he rides in and there is this stench of death, there is blood everywhere. It just reeks of burning flesh and the corpses of animals, and it stinks to high heaven, right? To use the expression. And so that leads us to the kind of the environment that he was not only, and take that, and how would you feel if you were Christ and that was the atmosphere even that you were in, right? And seeing all of that, not only that, but then also seeing that in time that would come to an end.
And that's why he wept.
Maybe,
I'm along with
Yeah,
the lost.
yeah, well, absolutely. There's a lot going on.
Well, and I'm reading Revelation last night.
Mhm.
I'm thinking everything. I mean, almost every sentence, almost every paragraph says you have to be covered.
Yeah,
Don't do this to these because they're covered.
Yeah.
Don't do, these are not covered. You can zap them.
yep, absolutely. Got to be covered. Any other thoughts or comments? So we can get into real quick, Jesus, our atonement. Leviticus 16 would be a great cross-reference for this, dealing with atonement, in helping to understand what atonement is, what Christ did. It was the most sacred day in Judaism. Because on that day, that is when the high priest entered, not the holy place, but the most holy place, with the blood of animals and made atonement for the sins of the people. And God had promised back in Exodus 25 and verse 22, I will meet with you and I will commune with you from above the mercy seat. That's where they met God. But regarding Christ, it wasn't the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood that he entered that holy place. Over in Hebrews, if I can find Hebrews. I'm serious. You know, the concordance in this Bible is so big, I can't find half of the New Testament books because I'm always passing and ending up in the concordance somewhere. Hey, there it is. Right before it changed where it should have been. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 12. Not through the blood, well, I'll start in verse 11. Hebrews chapter 9, beginning verse 11. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation, and not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. And you know, there also is that there used to be kind of a string with a bell outside tied to the priest, just to make sure it's like, okay, if he dies, that bell is not going to ring, you know. But if he's walking around, then it'll ring, and we know we're okay, you know. You know, so Jesus Christ is God's only means of providing atonement for man's sins. Okay. Israel, as we know through our studies, has always had an issue with God and with obeying God, paying attention to God's words and what have you. Them complaining, and so God sends the serpents among the people. And what did Moses have to do? Anybody remember?
No, it's old.
Bless you.
And you put
I know.
a bowl, put a snake figure on it.
Yeah, he put the serpent on it and lifts it up so that the people can look on that and be saved. As a side note, that, you know, Christ is also referenced as being lifted up. As an interesting side note, if you're ever studying with your denominational friends, many of them will mention that the people, all they had to do was look at that serpent on the pole, and they were saved, or they were healed if they had been bitten. So they take that, they'll take that sometimes, and they'll twist that to mean when Christ was lifted up, all you have to do is look to Christ. All you have to do is believe. You don't have to do anything else. Just kind of a side note, like I said, if you're out there with your denominational friends or something.
How do they explain in 1 Peter where it says,
Oh, baptism now saves you. You know, and there's an argument for everything. In John 3, when Jesus is talking about being born of the water and of the Spirit, they say that the water is actually the natural birth, you know, the earthly birth. When a child is born, you know, the water breaks, you know. You know, Christ on the cross is God's only means of salvation for those who would be His. Any closing thoughts or comments?
Well, when the priests were ordained, blood was so significant even in their being ordained.
Yeah.
The blood had to be placed on the certain places. In one part of Leviticus, they talk about the blood being put on the earlobe.
Yeah.
And, I mean, blood was very significant, even for their sacrifices that didn't take away their sins.
Oh, absolutely.
It was the foretelling of the importance of blood.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is, many Christians tend to dismiss or forget that, for one reason or another, as odd as it might sound, Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was a Jew, you know, and would have taken part as a Jew under the law in these different religious practices, you know. And so, you know, he would have been aware of that. And it's kind of, if you want to know Jesus, you got to read the Old Testament. I know that there are a lot who dismiss it and say it's got nothing good for us and what have you. Well, Jesus lived by it. So it's worth reading. Push through it. You know? Listen to it while you're doing dishes, but get it in there. I don't know. All right, I appreciate y'all very much, and we'll look at Christ fulfilling some prophecy and what have you next week.